when you talk about the self, let me put it this way. I often say sense of self, because you can say the self, and then there's a sense of self. You know, in Buddhism, there's this doctrine called anatta, which means no self, and I think that's
Hmm.
really important. That there's a sense of self, but the problem comes in where we think that there's a concrete or independently existing self, that it stands on its own, as it were. And one way to look at this is to consider the monster under the bed analogy, that kids get scared, they think there's a monster under the bed, and as adults we know there's not a monster under the bed. At least I hope so. Um, so basically, there's not a monster under the bed, and the reason is we've seen, we've looked, we've explored, we've investigated, and we know basically there's no monster, and so there is no monster there, but there is a sense of a monster. Now, for the child, there's a very strong sense of the monster, and it might be, you could say, reified in a certain way in the child's mind, where to them it is real. It exists independently and has its own will and ideas, and it's going to come out at the middle of the night when you're sleeping and get you or something.
Hmm.
Um, as an adult, we know that the monster's not there, and yet we can relate. Um, there's a sense of monster that we could all relate to. So when I talk about awakening, and I'm not a Buddhist in the strict sense or anything, but I like a lot of the Buddhist ideas, because Buddhism just means, you know, the Buddha means one who is awake, basically. So Buddhism, I guess, would be, a teaching of someone who's awake. That when you wake up, it's this the sense of self is there, but it's like the sense of monster. We know what it is. It's like a collective hallucination or something, and it's clear that there's no such thing, but it's also clear there's a strong sense of that, and there's fear about it, and it's sort of universal and collective. So a big part of this is, um, in a sense, being in the world but not of it, where to help people, it's a very strong sense of taking on the things of the world that are basically fear-based entities, and in a way suspending disbelief, I guess, and really participating in it fully. And on the level of common experience, these things are very real. It's just that they're never assumed to be ultimately real. Just like I don't think anyone would assume that the monster under the bed is real, except as a hallucination. You might have a room full of children, and they're all terrified and huddled under the blankets, about this monster. You could help them perhaps, but you have to go about it in a certain way, and one way is to allow this sense of an entity that you basically know isn't real. And yet it is a sense. It is something that you can allow and participate in, and it's not dishonest at all. It's completely part of this work, is in a way starting to become aware of the illusions that we create, these fear-based illusions, and they're rooted in a sense of self. It's just that it is a sense of self, and it's not ultimately real. And then that's what we're trying to get to, is through meditation and other spiritual practices, to start to see through the self. I mean, you talked about that, seeing through the self. You're not, so I mean, think about it as the monster under the bed. You're not seeing through the monster, because there isn't one. You're seeing through your own mind, really, your own assumptions that certain things are true based on what the world has taught us, or our parents have taught us, or school, that certain things are true or real, and questioning those things profoundly and witnessing them. I talked last time a lot about non-judgmental awareness. That really is the basic practice, is to be aware of these mental formations. And really they're just thoughts. I mean, that's the simple way to look at it. That to become aware of our thinking and to refrain from judgment so that we can be really clear. Again, sort of like a surgeon or a rescue worker might be, where there's utter clarity and purpose, and the purpose is to help people or to rescue people from a fire or from a flood or from a tornado or whatever's going on. In this case, spiritually, what we're rescuing people from is self, but it's an assumption of self, and that's really I'm going on quite a bit about this, but I think it's important that ego, the term ego, the way I use it, is not equivalent to the self. I know in the Freudian sense that, usually the ego is the self, basically. What I call ego is it's a tendency to reify that sense of self that's like the monster under the bed. So if you had a tendency to, let's just say you're a child and you have a tendency to contract in fear about this monster, this entity, basically what you're doing is you're having a thought and you're giving in to the thought's power over you, is a certain way of looking at it, because the monster is really just a thought in your head. It's nothing else. And so meditation is about becoming aware of how we do that. And I called it judgment last time. That's a good way to look at it, is there's a thought about the monster, and we basically think it's real, but through meditation we can see the mechanism of how we attach to thoughts and how that creates a sense of self in a world that seems independently real and is really scary. And so spirituality is really about becoming aware of thoughts so that we see them, but we don't buy into them in the same way. So like if someone said, if you had a friend, an adult, that said something about the monster under the bed, we would both say, yeah, I know, I'm aware of that, I know the monster under the bed, but you both know there's no monster. And yet you both are aware of what that is. So so in a way, being in the world, you can talk about things, but maybe you don't take them as seriously, you don't take yourself as seriously. You're not as much of an egotist, maybe. What's an egotist? Someone who takes themselves very seriously. You become, there's humility that comes in. And then you can, you're less selfish and self-centered with this practice. So you're sort of letting go. I mean, if you can imagine, like, you have this stream of thoughts, and if you're caught up in it, you get like this, like contracted, and it's like you're looking at a script going by, flowing by, like, oh, people are scary, and all these things, and Armageddon's coming, whatever. It could just, this stream of thoughts. In an unconscious mode would be where we're caught up in that, and that's what self is like. Is we're in this little thought bubble, and that's what egocentricity is. It's like, you try to talk to someone who's really caught up in that, and it's like they don't even hear you because they're so caught up in their thinking. And with meditation, you become more open, and the thoughts arise. I mean, last time I was showing this gesture of thoughts rising and falling, and it becomes much more of this passing phenomenon. Thoughts are arising, and there's no thought that's ultimately true. So you just kind of let them go, and then when that happens, it's kind of miraculous. You become more available for other people. You start to notice there are these other beings, and you're not just looking at them through this veil of thoughts anymore. What's the veil of thoughts? Racial identity, gender identity, so on and so forth, political orientation. You're not taking those as seriously either, and so you start to become aware of the dimension that I might call being. You start to notice that in others, and I would say that's what love is, really, is a recognition of oneness, that being, and I would use a capital B there, it's our essence, and that's what connects us, and that's what makes us one. And so I would say love is the recognition of that oneness. And when that happens, I mean, that's where we start to get into compassion. I hope that helps, the sense of like so you're talking about self, there's selfishness where we're sort of contracted and withdrawn from others and avoiding real intimacy and connection. And then there's a more open place where we can connect. And I also want to say it's not something where you are totally other focused either, like codependency, where you're so wrapped up in other people's stuff that you're not there for yourself. So it's neither, an avoidance of people nor an excessive indulgence of their stuff. It's really, it's a balanced awareness that doesn't judge, and it allows thoughts to be, and lo and behold, when we're not attached to that thinking, this beauty arises. That's, don't take my word for it, but this beauty is something that we are looking for, and we just have to become present enough for that to arise for us.